corporations face and how they will have to abide by it may just undermine China's long-term economic future. Do you think the push could threaten China's standing as the second largest economy in the world?
That is a concern in the minds of many observers outside of China because they believe Chinese economic growth has been possible even though the country is run by communist country. Basically, the economic side of the nation has been run by basic principles of market economy, right? And so even though it's a communist country, it's still kind of like private property. People own their own things that they produce and stuff like that. But now when the most successful figures and companies, entities are forced to give up their money, that really undermines the market principle and those people who are engaged in wealth creation for sure. So that is what people have in mind and very much concerned about. That's one side. To have a better balance on this, however, on the other side, those people who are driving this Commonwealth drive, what they have, common prosperity drive, what they have in mind is, can we say this? I guess sort of like people who've been talking about similar policy directions here in this country who believe, if we strengthen consumption, that will actually lead to a virtuous cycle of the economy rather than letting the rich people get richer. It's another side of the sound economic theory. Indeed, if we have a strong middle class, for instance, right? If we address the poverty problem and make the poorest people a lot richer than how they live today, actually they'll grow into a very healthy consumer and they can lead to a virtuous cycle. So that looks like that's the hope on the side of the Chinese government in pushing for this. And so rebalancing between different countries and then letting domestic market demand lead the economic growth rather than relying upon exports and China being a world's factory, if you will. Changing that paradigm, some people say in theory, actually, the pattern, the manner and tone and the way they're pushing it has a lot of problems, but the overall idea of restoring balance into economy and strengthening the common consumers, that side, that theoretical side, is reasonably sound economic theory, they say, on the other side. That we talked about the critics, but on the other side, they also add those points.
So, all right, the idea of common prosperity is perhaps even noble and understandable with basis, but in reality, when it pans out, I think the way it's forced, it may not necessarily up to that international standard.
Right, because what we see is almost billionaires and ultra-rich people being like Jack Ma disappeared and all of a sudden he showed up and said, we're going to give out $15.5 billion to the society. That's really scary thing. And that's why we hear lots of international businesses and investors actually, not only because of this, but there are other reasons, but kind of like leaving China or reducing the relative size of China in their portfolio. This started off from the time of Donald Trump when there was a Washington-Beijing tension and, like a restructuring of the world supply chain and stuff like that. But it looks like this drive for common prosperity seems to be accelerating the trend of international businesses and investors kind of departing from China, or at least reducing the importance of China in their portfolio or within their business portfolio.
Again, which makes us go back to that original question: does this undermine China's long-term economic future? And that's an angle to look at. As you mentioned, Professor Kim, we've been hearing news of these leading businesses and investors leaving or lessening their dependence on China in their portfolio. Also, there's news of Korea's leading businesses leaving China. So how serious are they about this decision then?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question, and I don't think there's a clear answer outstanding there yet, but we see these cases, right? Recently, the announced cases are SK businesses leaving China. Their auto service has been sold off to Chinese entities, and SK Group is reportedly are boldly with these reports that we've been hearing. They're selling their property, big buildings and stuff, and they're trying to change their overall, business strategy. Of course, we know Korean business have been adjusting their business in response to what China did in retaliation to the THAAD case, thermal high altitude, the missile defense system. That's several years ago, but since then, Hanhanyang, the discouraging Korea-related business in China has been in place, and Korean business has been acting this way. But latest one is SK Group. But right before then, or around similar time, we heard Hyundai Motor, for instance. They are working on reducing the number of Korean people, Korean staff inside China, and then also working on selling off their factories. That's a big deal because Hyundai Motors is such an important heavyweight in Korean economy. And before then, I think we were hearing about the LG selling their Beijing Twin Tower, for instance, and kind of trying to reduce their business size in China. Along with that, Samsung, of course, their smartphone productions in China over the years have been being reduced, and observers are saying that they're continuing to move towards that direction. Lotte Group is known to be is bearing the heaviest immediate casualty from the THAAD retaliation, and Lotte is totally has redesigned their retail businesses in China, kind of pulling out considerable portion of it and stuff like that. So there's no question about most of the biggest names in Korean business have kind of changing and restructuring their China business, not just in response to the latest drive of common prosperity, but the way China has been treating Korea and the way China has been handling the global affairs altogether. So if you look for a country that has been most affected by China's new face, if you will, we will have to say Korea is one of them, right?
Right. Taking a step back and maybe asking an even bigger question in regards to that, for investors and business operators at large operating in China, what do you think is ahead, and do we see this push to equalize wealth in China continue in the long run?
Yeah, will this drive continue in the long run? That's a big question. As an idea of economic policy, as I mentioned, strengthening middle class, and then low income level is a sound political economic theory. And along with that, of course, politically speaking also, taking side with the mass is a smart political strategy, to be objective about it. Rather than just working with the billionaires and elites and stuff like that, maybe it could make sense if China does not have a communist party and have a competitive democratic system, and maybe if they had a campaign finance, they will need money from the billionaires, and so there could be such alliance. But in the current political structure, what Xi Jinping needs is popular support, for sure. And we've been saying that we are mindful that I think it's next year when Xi Jinping is facing the renewal of his term for the third time, and staying in power longer than anyone else in the past since Deng Xiaoping's time. So for him, he faces a big political, the threshold here, and in doing so, he will have to appeal to the mass support. So this is an interesting thing. This whole move is causing a lot of concerns and suspicions in the eyes of the observers who are watching from outside, but inside, the common Chinese people who are not billionaires, they may actually like this idea, right?
Because it is about closing that wealth gap.
Yeah, exactly. And then making these common people, at least in Xi Jinping's words, richer than how they are living today. So it's a political appeal. So even with the Communist Party, they need political support, and especially in this critical time of political change coming up. So my prediction will be this drive will remain in place quite vividly until at least next year, and then Xi Jinping will continue to talk about, making common people richer. And that action will be those actions will be undertaken under this phrase, common prosperity, I guess. So that's the outlook, the way I see it.
Thank you very much, Professor Kim. And we'll have to
Thank
keep
you.
tabs on Beijing's crackdown on and what this idealistic but seriously sound for the country, it seems, common prosperity campaign. Thank you very much, as always. It was insightful. We'll speak to you again soon.
Thank you, as always. Thank you.
We're going to invite Albert into the studio for question unboxing with a track by Lucy Kewa Flower.
내가 느낀 모든 걸 너에게 줄 수 있다면 바람아 내게 봄을 데려와줘 시간아 나의 봄에 스며들어 점점 더 소리 없이 일렁이며 떨고 있는 초라한 맘은 그대는 물에 연꽃처럼 전부 멀어져 갈 거야 넌 그저 그 자리에 그대로 새하얗게 웃던 나를 기억하나요 그대 내가 느낀 모든 걸 너에게 줄 수 있다면 바람아 내게 봄을 데려와줘 시간아 나의 봄에 스며들어 점점 더 햇살에 깜빡깜빡 미끄러지듯이 우리 사랑을 기지개 피듯 두 팔 벌린 꽃들처럼 그대 꿈도 내놔 아무것도 할 수 없을 것 같은 것만 혼자만 남아